Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, hello, my name is Steven Sturdivant. I'm with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 6. And today we're going to talk about the food on our plate, because producing food is the largest cause of deforestation, biodiversity loss, species extinction, river pollution, and food-based solutions, including dietary shifts, will be critical to preventing climate change. Each webinar, we have someone from a different university share how they are addressing this important issue. And today, we will hear from several speakers at Harvard University. I want to let you all know, remember to mute yourselves if you're not speaking. There is a chat button to submit questions. Please use that chat. We will get to try to get to all the questions at the end. This webinar will be recorded, and I should also mention that the views and opinions expressed here today, as well as reference herein to any specific commercial products, process, or service, does not necessarily constitute or imply its endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the United States government, and shall not be used for advertising or product endorsement purposes. Okay, so I'm hearing a little bit of noise. If you could check your mics and go ahead and mute. And with that, I will now hand it off to Dr. Sparha Saha of Harvard University. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Very close. Sparsha Saha.
I apologize. Sparsha Saha. Sparsha will be introducing the other speakers. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen, for putting these together and for inviting us. We've been really looking forward to coming here and sharing some of what we've been up to at Harvard. So I'm going to quickly introduce everyone, and then I'll turn it over to Ed. So our first speaker is Ed Winters. He's known online as Earthling Ed. He's an educator, best-selling author, public speaker, and content creator. And he has worked with my course last semester in the fall, and we had such a great time. I will be presenting after Ed, but after me will be David Havlek. David is an assistant director in the Harvard University Office for Sustainability, where he helps to develop and advance the university-wide goals, standards, and commitments that are contained in the Harvard University Sustainability Plan. After David will be Arlene Lopez. Arlene is a third-year JD candidate at Harvard Law School, where she currently serves as campus advocacy chair of the Harvard Animal Law Society and as a 3L, which means a third-year representative and Student Affairs Committee co-chair to the HLS Student Government. After Arlene, we're going to turn it over to Camille Friedman, who is an undergraduate at Harvard University. She studies chemical and physical biology with a secondary in statistics. She is the co-founder and co-president of an emerging awesome group on campus that is housed under the Plant Futures Initiative that's associated with UC Berkeley. And Camille works on initiatives including surveying the Harvard community about views on plant-based, increasing plant-based options in dining halls, and building a community of plant-curious students that's really inclusive. Our final person will be I'll have Naveen pronounce his last name correctly if I didn't do it justice. Naveen is a second-year student at Harvard University with a special concentration in food systems and preventative healthcare. He is the co-founder and co-president of the same emerging group that's coming up at Harvard that falls under the Plant Futures Initiative umbrella, and he manages the Food Emissions Reduction Project for the Council of Student Sustainability Leaders. So I will turn it over to Ed next.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Saha, for that introduction. And I will speak for the next 10 minutes or so before handing it over to Dr. Saha to pick up on some of the bits that I don't have time to address, as well as to discuss the academic work that she's pioneering as well. I think it's always important when we talk about this issue, because it's such a big issue, to kind of set a bit of context around the scope of this problem. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is by putting it into stark terms. And I think an easy way for us to create a sense of obligation around dealing with these issues is to highlight the urgency that's there in front of us. And I think one of the things that can often get lost within this conversation about the climate crisis is really why we're trying to tackle this problem. I think that obviously what we're going to discuss today and what gets discussed so frequently in this issue is the numbers, the stats, the percentages, and those are incredibly important because they really set the scene for why these are issues to begin with. But I think beyond that, what helps me and drives me in terms of educating others about this issue and indeed as well fulfilling my desire to be as committed as possible to this issue is to recognize that when we talk about the climate crisis, and of course when we talk about food and what we choose to consume, what we're really talking about are issues of harm and suffering, and trying to, as far as we possibly can, negate and mitigate and minimize the suffering and harm that others are forced to endure as a consequence of what's happening to our planet, and indeed what's happening as a consequence of our food choices. And so I think when we discuss this issue, if we put it into those terms and we recognize that the urgency around this issue is not simply about safeguarding our planet and our environments, it is instead about safeguarding the well-being of all life on this planet, us and obviously non-human animals included within that. But I think when we lay it out and we focus on animal agriculture in particular, it's really important that we focus on the, I suppose, crucial aspects of this conversation. And with the limited time that I have to discuss this with you, I want to kind of really focus on land use and emissions. And the reason I want to do that is because emissions is incredibly important in this conversation. It's about the climate crisis, so emissions has to be a part of it. But also land use is not a uniquely animal agriculture specific problem, but when we look at the scope of animal farming, land use becomes a particular part of this conversation. Now, we've known for decades that the climate crisis is coming and has started to occur around us. But really, the introduction of animal farming into this conversation is still relatively new. And that's a real shame because we were actually told back in 2006, so 17 years ago now, by the United Nations in their landmark report, Livestock's Long Shadow, that the issue of animal farming had to be a major policy focus because it is one of the top 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the majority of the problems that we're currently facing. But now 17 years later, we have a situation where not only has animal farming not become a major policy focus, but indeed it's expanded, intensified, and got worse in the past 17 years. Now, this is obviously unfortunate for a multitude of different reasons, but one of the most particular reasons why it's unfortunate is that we have limited the time that we have to deal with this. And so what we're faced with now is an urgency that even 17 years ago we couldn't necessarily comprehend in the way that we experience it now, of course. Now, emissions is a big factor in this conversation because of the emissions produced by animals and produced in the production of feed for animals, as well as the emissions produced by the deforestation of landscapes to create way for land that can be farmed and used for animal farming. And actually, when we look globally, over 14.5% of current greenhouse gas emissions annually is attributed to the animal farming system. In fact, a more recent report says it might even be 16.5. But if we take the conservative 14.5, we can still see that that is a significant issue because let's say that we take all of the exhausts of all of the transportation globally. So I'm talking about the emissions that come from the exhausts of all the cars, planes, boats, trucks, you name it. That comes to 14%. So even with the most conservative estimate really around the emissions produced by animal farming, we're still looking at a more significant contributor than the exhausts of all transportation globally. Now, the report that I think is most notable in this conversation is one called Reducing Food's Environmental Impact Through Producers and Consumers. It's a landmark report that was published nearly 5 years ago now, and it was published in the highly regarded Science Journal. And what it looked at was over 1,500 different studies. It's a meta-analysis, so an analysis of analyses. So they pulled together all of this data. They looked at close to 40,000 farms in 119 countries around the world and analyzed every different system of farming. So, of course, grass-fed, pasture-based farming, but indeed factory farming, intensive CAFO systems, and plant crop arable farming. And due to the scope of this piece of research, it is to date considered the most comprehensive analysis that's ever been conducted exploring the relationship between farming and the environment. They looked at the US, of course, because the US, when we look at global meat consumption, is a big driver in this problem. And what they showed through their investigation was that actually food-related emissions in the US could be reduced by as much as 73% if it was that the US system was switched to a plant-based food system instead. And globally, we could reduce food emissions by 49%, so basically half by switching to a plant-based food system. Now, That's obviously a significant chunk. In fact, it's actually about 15% because food emissions globally equal about 30%. So halving that just by eating plants is a big contributor and a big help for us when we're trying to alleviate the problems in front of us. But actually, land use is potentially another aspect of this, which we absolutely have to address straight away, because when we look globally, the biggest user of land is animal farming. As Stephen so aptly and correctly said at the beginning, the biggest driver of deforestation, of habitat loss, of species extinction is animal farming. And that's because of the extremely large amount of land that it requires. Now, this report that I've been citing looked at land use according to its agricultural breakdown. And 83% of all agricultural land is given to animal farming. Only 17% is used for growing plants directly for human consumption. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be a problem if 83% of our calories and nutrition came from animal products, but that's not the breakdown that we see. In fact, only 18% of global calories come from animals and 37% of global protein, which means the vast majority of the food that we get comes from a system of farming that only uses 17% of agricultural land. Let's look at the US. Those percentages are actually even worse. The USDA estimates that 41% of the land mass of the 48 contiguous US states is used for animal farming, and only 4% is used to grow plants directly for human consumption. So more than 10 times the amount of land is allocated to animal farming in the US than is plant farming directly for humans. Let's say we take the land in the US and we repurpose some of that land. So now we look at the cropland that's used to grow feed for animals. So not all of the land, but just the land in the US that's used to grow plants that are fed to animals. If that land was repurposed and used to produce things like pulses and vegetables and fruits and grains for humans, well, according to Harvard Law School, that would equal enough food to feed another 350 million people globally. What we have now is not only a terrible system ethically in terms of the suffering and harm that is caused to humans and non-humans alike, but we have an incredibly inefficient system that is using the finite resources we have in a despicable way, in such a nonsensical way, because we can produce more food in a healthier and more sustainable and ethical fashion by simply switching to plants. And now with the land that we have left over, not only could we produce more plants for humans, but we could also return that land back to nature as well. Now, globally, if we look at the amount of agricultural land that could be saved by swapping to a plant-based food system, well, it equals 76% of current agricultural land. That's the land that we would no longer need to produce food if we were producing just plants. Now, to put that into perspective, that's an area of land equivalent in size to the whole of Australia, the whole of China, the whole of the EU, and the whole of the US combined, no longer being needed to produce food. If we free up that land, we can rewild, return that land back to nature, replant, reforest, regrow, and plants perform a process called photosynthesis, which means that to grow, they literally sequester carbon from our atmosphere, carbon dioxide. So not only does this mean that if we eliminated animal farming, we would reduce emissions because we're no longer farming animals who are huge contributors to the problem, but as well as that, we can produce a healthier food system and a more sustainable use of our land by rewilding and, as a consequence, drawing down carbon dioxide at the same time. And this report that I've been citing estimates that we could draw down 8.1 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year for the next 100 years if we rewilded the land that we would no longer need if we ate plants instead. 8.1 billion metric tons equals about 15% of our current global greenhouse gas emissions. So a plant-based food system eliminates 15% of our emissions straight off the bat and provides us with an opportunity to further draw down another 15%, which means that a plant-based food system could remove and sequester about 30% of our current greenhouse gas emissions. Now, just imagine if we did this alongside switching to renewable energy, alongside switching to better forms of transportation, alongside switching to better modes of clothing production. If we did this at the same time as everything else that we're championing and currently wanting to do, the benefit of it will be beyond what we potentially have realized, because it means we can hopefully address a significant part of the climate crisis and also provide the best opportunity for increasing biodiversity and making sure our planet is habitable, hospitable, and prosperous into the future as well. Okay, That was a bit of a whirlwind. I appreciate that. But there is so much to cover and not that much time. So I hope that gives you an idea, at least, of the scope of the problem, but also the importance of addressing food in this conversation, because as well as being important that we don't overstate something, it is also important to recognize the full potential of what we have in front of us. Okay. I'm going to hand it over now to Dr. Sparsha Saha, because obviously the cornerstone to everything we're talking about today is academic work, political science, environmental science, and Dr. Sparsha Saha is an expert when it comes to all things academic and political science orientated. So I will hand it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ed, for that incredible summary. You were able to fit in so much peer-reviewed research into that. Thank you so much for doing that. I think I saw a quick question. My eye just saw a question about seafood, and in the Poor and Nimseek study, they include aquaculture. So yes, growing fish. Farming fish also requires an area the size of the United Kingdom to grow that much feed for the fish as well. So it does include aquaculture as well. Now, I wanted to kind of continue on some of some of these themes that Ed was bringing up, and highlight that here at Harvard we are making progress on offering students these kinds of courses, but of course we need much more than just one. I did want to highlight some of the amazing work that's being done at the Harvard Business School as well, and we have someone from the law school who will talk about the work being done at the law school, but at the business school, about a year ago now, we had Professor Max Bazerman, who is a professor at the Harvard Business School, run what's called a short intensive program. So this is a week-long program in January that he ran, where we also covered this material. So really we have so many pioneers here at the institution doing this awesome work. I am so honored to be able to say that I'm offering the first lecture course that covers food, environment, and health at the college that will be available to undergraduates. It's also cross-listed at the Kennedy School, and I believe might be their first course that kind of covers all three of these aspects as well. So it really has been wonderful. We had our first class yesterday to see these students, I think, really hungry for the kinds of information and also hope that this presents, as Ed was telling us. So this course covers the environmental health and ethical costs, and then we dive into the politics of it as well, the food policy aspects of this too. I think the point about hope is so important, and this is what it highlights so well. This is an issue that is about time as well. We are running out of time. Focusing on animal agriculture, shining more light on it, presents so many solutions that buy us an incredible amount of time and also help us get closer to these goals that we have around sustainability. So those two areas around methane. So methane is actually in the short term, it's a much more dangerous greenhouse gas because it warms the planet at a much higher rate. And so we report everything in CO2 equivalent, but actually that's over a longer period of time. And so when we look really at the next 20, 30 years, which is what we should be focused on, we find that if we try to bring down our methane emissions, it really helps us not trigger this ecological process into gear. And the other element of that has to do with land use, as Ed brought up. So Matt Hayek's incredible work, some of the most important work in this field, published in Nature, found that if we switch to plant-based diets, the benefit from this photosynthesis, right? This is the best way we currently know of sequestering carbon back. It doesn't rely on a technology, it relies on working with nature instead of against nature. We could, by 2050, sequester at the low end of his estimate, almost 100% of our carbon budget. Right, so the benefits are vast. But one other element I wanted to also bring up was what this would mean for biodiversity loss. And this is a core planetary boundary that we are not putting attention on, and it touches on so many environmental factors. Climate change is one, biodiversity loss is just as important, but it does not get much attention. Part of this is because scientists are still trying to figure out how to actually quantify biodiversity loss. But report after report is showing us that the UN Red List is massively underestimated, that actually biodiversity loss is occurring at a much faster rate than we think. I read a paper in Biological Reviews, which is one of those journals where, you know, you don't see a lot of, you know, language that touches the heart, but I couldn't believe what I was reading. The scientists who published this report showing that biodiversity loss is much worse than we think, said that this is a moral abrogation of our responsibility as a species on this planet. So not only are we able to sequester this carbon, we actually might tackle biodiversity loss if we give this land back to nature. So I wanted to quickly highlight some of the research that I'm doing, and then I'm going to turn it over to David. So the research I am doing is in political science, and to my knowledge, it's the only work that exists in political behavior on this topic. What I argue is that before we can really implement policy, and there are a lot of policy papers about how we can, you know, start to address some of these environmental and health costs around industrialized animal agriculture. But before we do that, we need political attention. We need this issue to be put on the agenda. And so my work asks, well, what would happen if a politician put political attention on this topic? I hypothesized that it would lead to a lot of voter backlash. And I tested two ways of bringing it up. One way I tested was to link for a politician to do a stump speech where they link the environment, the costs, they link meat and the environment, showing that it is an area of environmental concern that we need to address to reduce our meat consumption. And then the other way I tested it was to bring up farm animal rights. And we know from research that ethics is actually one of the stickiest ways to get people to start reducing their meat consumption. So I wondered, well, what would happen if a politician brought up farm animal rights at the national level? So this is I tested this in a presidential primary context. And I was shocked. I expected that this would lead to the most voter backlash, and I didn't pick up any. So on the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, no backlash for bringing up farm animal rights. This said to me that there is great taste for this issue among voters, and that there is a place for this. And maybe we're right now kind of just starting to kind of break that taboo around bringing this issue up. So I'll stop there. I want to turn it over to David, who has really been doing that really wider work at the higher level work at the university and beyond in trying to help people in the cafeterias, in their dining areas, make better choices. So David, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Sparsha. And so I do have a couple slides to share, and I've seen in the chat people keep asking if this is being recorded. It is being recorded, so I believe a link will be sent out afterwards. So I just wanted to give a sense to Sparsha's point about what's going on institutionally at Harvard, because I think there's a bit of a tension between organizations telling people what to eat or us telling each other what to eat. And also, which is itself a problem and interesting, but also not blaming it on the individual and actually taking responsibility as organizations and institutions for nudging people toward plant-based food, offering new products and things like that. So there's this obvious and important responsibility for institutions, and Harvard has really taken that responsibility seriously on food, among other things related to sustainability. So Harvard will be launching its new Sustainability Action Plan soon this year. And Harvard's goal is to accelerate action for a healthier climate and environment, a more equitable society, and the well-being of people now and in the future. We have fossil fuel goals. And Harvard is set up really like almost like a multinational company or a city, in the sense that we're really decentralized. We have multiple schools. You've already heard someone from Harvard College. We have people at the law school, business school, et cetera. And each of those schools within Harvard makes its own decisions about who's going to run its cafeteria and things like that. And so things we do here at Harvard and the kind of process we take to set standards for all of our vendors really forced us kind of to take the process that I'm going to describe in a moment. We also are pretty big, so we serve over 10 million meals a year. So the things we're doing here really have a big impact. And so because we have these multiple food vendors on campus, we needed to create food standards, sustainable and healthful food standards. So we put together a faculty committee, which is represented here. We were lucky enough to have Walter Willett, who chaired the nutrition department at the Harvard School of Public Health for many years, and who was a co-author on this really great report and study that I'll recommend you check out. The information is there. Again, this is being recorded, so you can always screenshot it there, but it's the Eat-Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health. And in that report, it said that the food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. And if you read this report, you'll really see it's moving us and suggesting that we need to move in this plant-forward direction. And so that's really what Harvard's doing. We also had faculty from the law school, the business school, et cetera, on this committee. And so the goal of these food standards really is to provide a more healthful, sustainable food supply for our community, but that is not really the main impact that we're focused on. The other focus is really driving changes in the marketplace, quantifying the impacts we're having, learning along the way, and making sure that we're really using our campus as a test bed so others can learn, leapfrog, do better, and we can all continue sharing, as we're doing today. And so you can check our website. We have food standards that address all 6 of these areas: climate, reduction of food waste, consumer well-being, welfare of animals, education and food literacy, and well-being of workers and communities throughout the value chain. So you can check that out. But I'll zoom in, just as Ed did earlier, on climate. So Harvard also in 2019 was one of the early signatories of something called the Cool Food Pledge. This is organized by the World Resources Institute. And all the signatories to the Cool Food Pledge have made a commitment that's aligned with the science to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions related to food by 25% by 2030. And by Harvard signing on to this, first of all, we were trying to show others this is important. This is based on the right science. By the way, the science underlying this is exactly the paper that Ed mentioned earlier and that we shared in the chat. But also it helps us internally because now we have this shared goal across the university. So when people that you'll hear from in a moment have ideas for advocating for better things in the cafeteria or things like that, they're really just helping our food vendors and our community and our leadership meet our goal. They're not trying to push them in a direction that they don't want to. So this was really important internally. And so now we have 3 years of data, which is very exciting, and we're moving in the right direction. Of course, COVID hit, so we needed, so the Cool Food Pledge team adjusts this by calorie. So this is greenhouse gas emissions per calorie. And it's been really exciting, again, being a part of this and having access to this data is able to show internally that the work that our food service vendors are doing is really having a big impact. Also, what's very exciting, and this kind of speaks to something Sparsha was talking about, is political will in politics. So Harvard signing on to this pledge, actually one really exciting example of the impact was, as the mayor of New York, you'll see here, really said that Harvard's leadership as a founding signatory of the Cool Food Pledge was a strong vote of confidence that inspired New York City to incorporate it into their city's climate playbook. And now they've been doing a lot of things around plant-forward food, et cetera, in New York City, which is very exciting. And I'll just give you a sense of some of the institutional work that's going on. And again, I think there's an importance of individual action, but what I'm talking about here is really institutional, organizational action, which again needs to kind of meet the demand and be ready for it. So we have sustainable meeting and event guide, which you can see here, which kind of helps support people who want to order more plant-based foods and things like that for meetings and events and why they may want to do that. Harvard undergrad created this plant-based eating guide on the right, which among other things features some quotes and testimonials of athletes who are plant-based and have plant-based diet. Harvard Dining Services was the first to team up with the Humane Society almost a decade ago for plant-based chef training. And then we had them back, the Humane Society back a couple years ago, again, to train our chefs on plant-based cooking because it is different. And we do need the food to be really delicious. We also hosted a nudge-a-thon, both for students here at Harvard and students in China, to be pitching both to me. So Max Bazerman, a professor from the business school that Sparsha mentioned earlier, is here, was a judge, and Harvard Dining Services. Everyone was pitching nudges in that cafeteria. How can we nudge people to pick more plant-based food? Again, not blaming the individual, but actually leveraging our institution and the way we set up the food, the order it appears in line, all these things. How can we creatively use that and leverage that to nudge people in a plant-forward direction? My office, the Office for Sustainability, also has a default veg policy. We've worked really closely with a group called Greener by Default, which I know at least one person from Greener by Default is here on the call. And Greener by Default has helped train food orderers at Harvard, student groups, on how to kind of create a default veg policy, which is the policy kind of that for events you'll serve plant-based food and you'll ask people if they want something else, rather than the other way around, which is tell people you'll serve them dinner and then say, let us know if you want have any dietary restrictions. So it's just swapping the default, which has really been effective at Harvard. And then finally, we had a postdoc from the School of Public Health label food in the cafeteria and its climate impact and kind of measure the impact of that. So that's just some of many examples of things going on in our cafeterias, dining halls, and catering that has been really moving the needle, and that's why you see that impact. And so I'm going to stop sharing and then give you an example. So that's kind of the supply side, the institutional side. What is really the important other kind of leg to the stool is really the students, the customers, the demand, and the advocacy. So I'm going to turn it over to Arlene to talk about a little bit of the work she's been doing over at the law school.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Arlene. I'm a third-year JD candidate at Harvard Law School. And during my time here, I've been involved in animal and food advocacy. I saw a question a little bit earlier in the chat that asked, how can Harvard become a plant-based campus, and can it lead the future? And I just wanted to answer that, and I'd say yes, that's the goal. And I think that's why I'm really excited to speak to you all today, because how do we get, question I ask myself is, how do we get Harvard and how do we get the future to be plant-based? A philosophy that I really love to follow is, if you change the world, you need to start at home. And basically in the form of grassroots campaigning. Right now, I like to think that as individuals, it's all about finding opportunities for change in the very communities that we're already a part of. Pretty much identifying what are ways that things can be done better. For me, for example, the way I got started, it was a real simple, but going into the cafeteria, if I wanted coffee, I couldn't really find non-dairy options. If I wanted tea, I would only find honey. I couldn't find agave. When it came to finding food, not everything was very clearly labeled. Certain things were just more pricier than others. And so I had to start asking myself, how can I change this? For me, obviously, the reason was at the minimum, right? My own selfish reasons. I want to be able to eat when I'm on campus, but it was also a realization that I'm not the only one that's having these issues. And the longer I've been on campus, the more people I speak to, the more I'm realizing that without having plant-based options, we're not having an inclusive community. And so, my question is, how do you bring people together to support this issue? People have all sorts of attachments to food. Some of it's based on culture, tradition, religion. Some of it's more emotional attachments based on comfort. Or some of it's health related. People have found what works for them and they're afraid to change it. But my answer to that is, how do you bring all those people with all these various reasons behind their diets in? It's you introduce them and you make it less scary, you make it normal, you make it easy, you make it affordable. Some of the initiatives I've been working on this year, they include Plant Positive Wednesdays in the Harvard Law School cafeteria, which is every Wednesday. The main center of the cafeteria, where all the dishes are that are prepared by the chef, they're all plant-based. They're all labeled and it's well advertised around the school. And the goal is to just encourage people one day in their life to give it a try, to give plant-based food that's well tasting, that's priced the same price that all the food is normally priced at, to give it a try. Another advocacy effort that I've been working on and I'm in the midst of right now is planning the Food for Thought Festival. Pretty much it's an opportunity to bring in local vendors that can serve plant-based food. And the goal is to make this a free event that's open to the community. And a lot of this funding is, being gotten from institutional support, such as like the Office for Sustainability, where David is at, as well as student funding from student orgs that we have, so collaborating with other students. So I guess I want to just talk a little bit logistically, how did I get any of this off the ground? And the first thing I have to say is talking to people. Identifying who are the stakeholders, who are influencers, who are decision makers, who are gatekeepers. Both people who are inside and outside an institution. You really need everybody. You need support from your peers to have buy-in, to see these projects that you work on continue happening, people that are like-minded to help you carry out these plans, because you can't do it alone, but you also need the institutional support, the people who can tell you no, to say yes, and to get behind it and to put their names behind it. So that other people who might not be open to it are. And then, something I also thought about is, how can I legitimately, when I'm speaking, especially to administration, to people who are above me, so to speak, this hierarchy that we have, how do I get them to take me seriously? And something I really thought about is, how can I claim to represent people? How can I claim to represent students? How can I claim to represent interests? And so I took that as an opportunity to get involved in student groups. That's how I became a 3L rep for student government. That's how I came to co-chair student affairs. And that's also how I came to be the campus advocacy chair for the Animal Law Society. I think being able to find positions like that, if they exist, just really helps, I think, a little bit sort of bolster a little bit of legitimacy. I think, you can always take approaches alone, but to do things alone is so much more difficult when instead you can have an entire team of people behind you. And so another consideration I also had was just, how do you institutionalize any sort of initiatives that you take? You're only one person. So if you start something in your community, what happens when you leave? How do you ensure that it continues past your time? And something that's really helped with me is being able to work with administration, and really being able to identify people and institutions that want to support this. As David said, Harvard thankfully is behind this, and I feel really lucky and blessed for that opportunity. And especially having the support of the Office for Sustainability is it's incredible. I know the Plant Positive Wednesdays, when I brought that to my school, the more conversations I had, eventually out of the university dining services, they have their own initiative called the Harvard Food Systems Initiative. And it's under this initiative that they said that they wanted to fully integrate this Plant Positive Wednesdays and see if this is an opportunity to spread it, not just from the law school, but across the other 12 colleges of the university. In short, I really just want to say that, I'm one person and I know that this is an issue that seems way bigger than any one of us individually can handle or solve. But we need individuals to start this. And, something that really reminded me of that is, after we finally got the Plant Positive Wednesdays launched, when I spoke to the executive chef, he told me, Arlene, it's because of you that we could do this. If you never had come to us, we would not be able to do this. We needed student voices, we needed support. And that's just true for any institutions that you're operating within. And so I just want to encourage you, you're not in this alone, and you can bring about change. And I'm, on that end, I want to be able to pass it off to Naveen, who is doing some amazing work at the undergrad, and who I'm thankful to even be working with him and Camille for the Plant Positive, for the food festival.
Thank you so much, Arlene, and we're inspired by all of the work that you've done at the law school. And now we're going to talk about the challenges and the accomplishments that we've had at the undergraduate level and kind of how this is framed within this larger scope of things that all of us are kind of doing on campus and beyond, and how all of us, as well as everyone here, can really come together and make this more than what it is, and hopefully inspire this movement and benefit the world ultimately. So before that, I would like to pass it on to Camille to kind of give an overview of some of that work.
Yeah, thank you, Naveen. Hi, everyone. I'm Camille. I'm a second-year student at Harvard College, and I've been working very closely with Naveen the past year and a half on plant-based initiatives on campus under the guidance of Dr. Sparsha Saha. So we kind of started in our expository writing class, which was taught by Dr. Saha, called Animals and Politics, and Samantha Derrick from the Plant Futures Initiative came to our class as a guest speaker. And Naveen and I were both really inspired by her talk and decided to start our own chapter of Plant Futures at Harvard. So Plant Futures at Harvard University, we're broadly focused on plant-based food solutions to bring about more environmentally sustainable, ethical, and healthy food systems. And so we're really striving to create a plant-based community at the undergraduate level on Harvard's campus, as Naveen mentioned, and as well as generating mainstream attention on the impact of food choices on the environment. And a big goal of Plant Futures Initiative broadly and with our chapter on our campus is to connect students to opportunities in the plant-based food sector. And we work with lots of different partners across the university in the hopes of increasing plant-based options in the dining halls. So to give a little bit of context, basically, like I think 98% of undergraduates all live on campus, and you're required to be on an unlimited meal plan for all 4 years. So basically everyone gets all of their meals at the dining halls, 3 meals a day. So we're really trying to work on these initiatives to get students to start thinking about the impact of their food choices because it really starts there. And we've done this through surveying over 300 members of the Harvard community and sharing results of the surveys with dining hall managers and kind of discussing opportunities for expanding plant-based options to get people to start thinking about these issues. And I'll pass it over to Naveen to talk more about some of the challenges we faced and how we plan to tackle them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. I think it's definitely important to acknowledge that it hasn't been an easy road for all of us, for any of us really, and there's a ton of challenges that come with pushing these sorts of initiatives on campus, especially in the face of a lot of people who might be uncomfortable with this change or unfamiliar with what it looks like. So we've particularly faced a lot of resistance with even just getting our club and our initiatives up and running because a lot of people are maybe not familiar with the importance of changing the food system for climate and ethics and health and all of the above. So I think one of the lessons that we've really taken from our experience is that we need to start working with the institution as opposed to against it. Because when we try to push something that they're opposed to, we're likely to take steps back as opposed to steps forward. So what we've been trying to do is understand how it makes sense from the dining hall's perspective or from the college's perspective to make these sorts of shifts from an environmental perspective, from a reputation perspective. So I think it's important to kind of understand those things and work as partners as opposed to opponents to these people. And as part of that, we've worked on building a dedicated leadership team of students that we meet on a weekly basis to discuss our plans, as well as advisors that are consistent of Harvard faculty, as well as external partners that we can really work with on driving change on campus and beyond. So some of the things that we have worked on are with the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard, creating an accelerator workshop called Plant Futures, Equipping and Empowering the Next Generation of Leaders that will accelerate the transition to plant-centric food systems. So we really outlined during a workshop in August, what are the steps that Harvard needs to take to make this Plant Futures vision a reality. And we talked about different initiatives that could be done at the various schools, as well as kind of by the Office for Sustainability and beyond. And we talked about what that would look like and what our next steps were. And I think that was really important for us as to frame our club's initiatives and efforts for the year. In addition, we've presented poster presentations that are focused on climate change, worked with other climate-focused organizations and animal ethics-focused organizations on hosting events. And aside from creating events, we've really worked on building a strong community of students and faculty. And that has been done through hosting interest meetings and pop-ups and creating interest through bonding with food and outings to, for example, the Boston Veg Fest. And we had invited an external speaker from the Eating Plants documentary and had a film screening with them and a Q&A with the directors and producers. And we had a ton of people attend that. And we're interested in seeing the impacts that eating plants can have on the planet and on our diet. And I think just by building that community and spreading that education on campus, but not forcing it on people or imposing it on people, it's been a really good way that we've been able to garner more support and been able to spread our initiatives on campus. And I think Camille is going to talk a little bit about some other work we've been doing as well.
Yeah, just to echo what Naveen is saying, just showing people how delicious and amazing plant-based foods can be. Our most current event that we're working on right now is the Leverett House Sunday Sundays. So Leverett House is one of the 12 residence houses for the upper level classes, and I personally live in Leverett House, so I was very excited to work with the dining hall on this event. We got support from FOMU, which is a local dairy-free ice cream brand, and they're going to provide the dairy-free ice cream for this event, and it's going to be throughout the entire dinner period. Normally on Sundays, the Harvard University Dining Services offers ice cream for students, but there's never usually a dairy-free option. There is sometimes a lactose-free option, but never dairy-free, which is kind of unfortunate for people who don't eat dairy. And we also got funding from the Leverett Residential House for the student-initiated program. And we're getting a lot of support from the Leverett Dining Hall manager, who himself is lactose intolerant and is a big fan of dairy-free ice cream. So this is just an example of one of the initiatives we're doing to build community and gain support for plant-based foods on campus. And I'll hand it back to Naveen to talk more about his efforts beyond Harvard.
Yeah, thank you, Camille. And I think one of the biggest things that we have been really trying to work on is expanding beyond Harvard, as I've mentioned a few times, because ultimately, like we've all brought up, this is something so much beyond just our institution and what we can do, but also includes kind of the power that we all collectively, everyone on this panel, as well as the people who are attending, to make this change. So I think one of the things that we have been trying to work on is with the Federal School Food Policy Coalition, which works on steering federal policy in a more plant-forward direction. And through these initiatives, I've been able to work with a lot of congressional officials, and we actually had worked on passing a bill in the House, which was the first bill in U.S. history to actually have a plant-based grant program as a pilot program in it. And I think that through these initiatives, we've seen that there is change happening beyond Harvard, but also at the federal, state, and local level with regards to plant-based initiatives. One of my experiences actually was being able to attend the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health that happened this past September. And it was really an amazing experience. Mayor Eric Adams from New York, who was mentioned before, spoke on the importance of plant-based diets for solving food insecurity issues and addressing a lot of other health-related crises in the United States. But even at that event, I saw that there was somewhat a lack of discussion on these issues in various camps. And there's definitely a lot more sort of policy making decisions that can be made that would be more in this direction that we all want to see. So I think that that's something that we're always continuing to work on and seeing how, we can make this something that is talked about. And as Dr. Saha had mentioned, it's something that people are willing to, accept, and it is not as there's not as much resistance to talking about these issues in politics as people might think. So I think it's just important that we really acknowledge that and decide the best ways to move forward. And kind of on that note, I just wanted to close by talking about the interconnectedness of all the work that we have been doing at Harvard. The success has come from our collaboration with Dr. Saha in starting this club, as well as working with the Office for Sustainability and David on measuring food and its impacts on the Harvard University's environmental footprint, and working with Arlene on hosting events and Ed on hosting events as well. So I think that our strength is in unity and being interconnected and working together. We all share the ultimate goal of reducing the environmental impact of our food choices, and together we are able to accomplish those goals much more effectively than if we were to do so alone. So I think that's really important. And we are always looking forward to collaborating with other universities and other organizations. We're hoping to have a career fair at the end of the spring, and we'd love to pull together some organizations here as well. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all trying to build a movement, so we would love to work with everyone.
So I think now we move into Q&A, and I'm hopeful that Stephen maybe can help us with this a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to tackle it now. What a great conversation in the chat. So many people submitting questions and comments. This is wonderful. It's going to take me a little bit to go through this, but I'm going to try to get everything answered here. So, there was a question about can you touch on the nutrients in animal products versus plant products? When doing these comparisons, anyone want to say anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to maybe jump in. I don't know if there's a specific area that the question was alluding to, but when we look at nutrients from plant products, I mean, not only has the T.H. Chan School of Public Health at Harvard done work extensively on this, and obviously there's the Eat Lancet report that was cited earlier as well. The question of nutrients in a plant-based diet is not a question of if it's possible, it's just a question of how it's possible. And what I mean by that is, obviously, when we switch to a different form of eating, we have to make sure we know how to get all the amino acids we need, so the adequate amount of protein, the iron that we need, the calcium, zinc, and all of these essential nutrients. But it's just more about empowering people to be able to know how to make those choices. And I think that as consumers, we are somewhat disempowered when it comes to our nutrition autonomy, and part of that is a failing of the education system, but also a failing of the USDA and of these different departments that have a responsibility to give people the best opportunity they have to take control of their own health. So I think one of the things that's remarkable about plant-based diet is its potential to help people take control of their own health in a very unique way. And obviously in America, that's a very important aspect of overcoming so many of the different crises that's occurring, not just there, of course, but all over the world. So I think it's just about looking at it as an opportunity to take that authority of our own health and recognizing that animals are often taking nutrients from plants and then not optimizing our capacity to get nutrients in return. And so what I mean by that is they operate as kind of like a middleman, if you like, where we put all this protein into them and all these calories and nutrition into them, and in return we get very little. And when we look at what we call kind of like feed conversion ratios, and we look at protein conversion ratios, we see that even the most, quote unquote, efficient forms of animal products, we're still losing about 75% of the protein, through the animal. So if we want to optimize nutrition for humans, let's cut out the part of the process that's making it hard for us to do that, and just go straight to the source, which in this case, of course, is the plants.
Great. And Sparsha, did you touch on seafood earlier? I think maybe you answered that question.
The report did include it.
Okay. How can high schools be a part of the solution? Any tips for high schools?
I can speak a little bit about this. coming recently from high school and working on some initiatives in high school related to these issues. I myself am working on a coalition called the Plant Powered Youth Steering Committee, as well as the Massachusetts Healthy School Food Coalition. And these are independently organizations that bring together youth, including both college and high school students, as well as some middle school students, to see what we can do. And I think what's really been helpful is also, we had the opportunity to testify in front of the USDA a few months ago, and really seeing that these organizations, the government, I mean, and organizations within the government, really emphasize youth voices and centering these voices. And they actually have a guide, which I can also reference in the chat, about how to make change in your own cafeterias and school cafeterias and the steps that one would need to take. And I think that's been really helpful. A lot of students have organized through their clubs different petitions, or they've organized sort of different talks with the managers of the cafeterias and hosted sort of pilot plant-powered Fridays or something like that, and seen the impact of it on students. I think those are all really important, and I think that there are definitely ways that students can lead the movement if they work together on bringing these changes in their schools.
I'd love to jump in on this question too, because I'm wondering if high school structures parallel some of the university structures, and I think this is also about supporting each other. So even in high school, there's admin, there's teachers, and there's different kind of entities involved. And I think the people who are doing the educating, so I'm in a non-tenure track position, I'm the one who's touching the students. So I've been teaching this in a small version for 3 years. So right there, I have 200 students, right, who are coming into the student body who are aware now, who know. And I wonder if that's true in high schools too. So if you're an admin, if you're in positions where you get to decide committees and you're kind of shaping these things, look around and see who is it that you can raise up and include in the various things you're doing. So just keep your eye out, because there are going to be very active people, right? And the more you can get them in those high level committees and those organized the ways that sort of shape the larger structures, that's where you're going to really see growth.
I just want to quickly add, I tend to think of it too in terms of supply and demand. And so in high school, sometimes it's that the supply side doesn't understand what the demand side wants. We've even seen that at some schools at Harvard, where at events people were offering pizza, but when you ask students, are you happy that it's pizza there, or would you rather some healthy, nutrient-rich meal instead of pizza? They're like, yeah, but if it's pizza, I'll just eat it. And so when you survey people, give that to the food orderers, then the food orderers don't feel like they're taking a chance by offering some really great nutrient-rich, delicious meal instead of pizza. They know that it's the case. So same thing with a high school cafeteria. If you can survey your fellow students, hey, we want blah blah blah, it may be important for the supply side to hear that.
Okay, real quick, there's a lot of questions about, will this be recorded? Where can I get more info? I'm going to drop my email right now in the chat. And if you want a copy of this presentation, a recording, just email me. Okay, that's right. Okay, did that work? No. Let's try again. There we go. Okay, that email address right there. If you want a copy of the recording, please let me know. Okay, there was one question out there. What kind of work or strategies are in place for supporting those who work in the animal food industry in the transition to plant-based production? Can we make this transition? It looks like they're asking, what are resources out there? And I'd like to just mention real quick, there are a number of organizations that are assisting. Even the USDA gives money out to take land out of production. There are resources and nonprofit and government organizations out there. Please contact me, email me. Let me get you connected. I actually had another recorded webinar of organizations that talk specifically about this issue. How can we support this transition if for those farmers that want to get involved? So if anyone else wants to add to that, you're welcome to, or we can move on.
Yeah, I just want to quickly back that up. I mean, that is important that people are thinking about this. This is what we talk about as a just transition, right? And we're talking about this in the energy field. I also saw someone say in the chat, well, this has been an industry in our community for a long time. Well, so was coal, right? And coal was important to many communities. And so we can't just move away from coal and forget those communities. There is a lot of work and resources needed to make this transition be just for everyone involved. But I think it's who's responsible for that, where there's resources, like Stephen's saying, are important. But I think that's maybe, other people need to work on that. And we're talking from a different perspective. But that is so important, that just transition. We don't want people to be unnecessarily hurt by this transition to a more sustainable diet.
Also, I've been researching this for several years. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of times the headlines get it wrong. They refer to studies. There was one study that was dropped in the chat saying, hey, emissions from diet change isn't that much. They referenced the study. Just so you know, the authors of that study said this did not look at diet change, right? The authors themselves are saying this. So be real careful when looking at headlines. Click on the study itself, read the abstract yourself. And also, like Ed mentioned, meta-analyses are studies of studies, right? We want to get what is the consensus of the scientific community at large on this topic, right? And so that's what meta-analyses attempt to do. So be aware of that. And if I also put some resources in direct response to that study in the chat, but feel free to reach out to me and talk more about that. Okay, there was a mention about lab-grown meats. Did we touch on that? Anybody want to talk about lab-grown meat or fake meats? Did we, like plant-based meats?
Just quickly, and please, anyone should add. I think those are two very different things, right? So lab-grown meat very likely is going to be pretty energy intensive at first.
That might be there's newer research on that showing that the energy intensiveness comes from the growth serum that these cells rely on, but we're finding out that we might not need this serum, actually.
Oh, well,
yeah,
that's also good.
It really just came out 2 days ago, so it's very recent news. It was published very well, but they were able to make this happen without the growth serum, which is energy intensive.
Cutting edge. That's exciting. Well, also, and then in terms of the process things, I think what I've heard from Walter Willett at the School of Public Health and many other researchers is, sure, whole foods, plant-based diet, probably ideal. Is that likely for everyone, or do we need some transition, some replacements that are a little bit better? And I think that's where some of these processed plant-based foods may play an important role. And the other thing is, though, we should keep these plant-based food companies honest about the health impacts of the foods they're producing. And as Ed said and others, not all plant-based food is created equally. And let's hold them accountable. Let's make sure that the replacement is better for the planet and for health wherever possible, for sure. And that's what we're kind of trying to do with our food service partners at Harvard as well.
Okay, and so there was a question about packaging and transportation. Were these studies that you talked about, did the authors include the impacts of packaging and transportation in their estimates?
Yeah. They do life cycle assessments. They're looking at the entire supply chain, the entire process, and that includes transportation and packaging. And actually, the idea of transportation is a really important part of this, because there's sometimes an understandable yet false conclusion drawn that the biggest problem related to food is the the distance the food travels, but actually the study that I cited, the one that's been cited a few times throughout this webinar today, the Reducing Food's Environmental Impact Through Producers and Consumers, looked at the emissions related to transportation. They broke it down in that way as well. And what was remarkable, albeit kind of frightening, is how when we look at red meat, so beef and lamb, 90% plus of the emissions associated with these food products actually comes from the farming itself. And a study done in the US looked at food miles and showed that eating plant-based diet just 1 day a week had the equivalent in terms of emission savings as having a diet with 0 food miles. So actually just 1 day a week of plant-based diet was the equivalent of having, it's actually better than having a diet with 0 food miles. So imagine what 7 days a week would look like in that sense. So that's not to say that we shouldn't look at food miles. We shouldn't look at how we transport food. We absolutely should. But when we talk about the impact of food, what we're eating is the biggest question here. And then above and beyond that, as we start to hopefully progress into a more equitable, sustainable and ethical food system, how we transport that food, how we package that food, not relying on single-use plastics, not relying on gas-guzzling lorries and trucks, that has to be a part of that ethical and equitable and sustainable transition. But fundamentally, from a consumer perspective and in terms of what Harvard can achieve, what is on the plate is more important at this particular point.
Yeah, and there was another question regarding, do these studies, consider different types of land when estimating their emissions reductions? Did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, not all land is equal. Some land isn't suitable for growing crops on. Some land degrades quicker. Some soils degrade quicker. A lot of soils are obviously depleted in nutrients, and that will vary across different landscapes, different regions. Maybe an arid area of the US will obviously be a lot different to a more rain-drenched area of the US. And so there are, of course, variabilities that have to come into the conversation. And so these variabilities are taken into account in a lot of cases, at least. I can't say in every case, but with the one I've been citing, it looks at close to 40,000 farms in 119 countries. And part of the reason why that scope is so large is to look into different variables, because it's through these variables we can create kind of like a consensus, or at least we can get an idea for what the rule is tending to be. And so even if you find kind of areas that maybe naturally take to kind of being pasturelands or grasslands, for example, even if as soon as we take the animals off those areas of land and we allow those lands to rewild, we have increasing biodiversity, we have more carbon capture, and of course we have less emissions as a result of not having those animals. So even if you take what would be the best land possible for grazing animals, as soon as you remove those animals from that land, you start to see gains and bonuses from an ethical and sustainability perspective. So I hope that answers the question. Yes is the answer, and for good reason, because it's not only important, but it also goes on to prove that actually transitioning away in all these different situations is a beneficial thing for us to do.
Yeah, and I've also dove into a lot of these meta-analyses, and they do a really good job. I mean, life cycle assessment means that you're looking at everything, and these authors, they do their homework and they make sure that this is, an accurate as possible depiction of what might happen. How our actions can help mitigate environmental harms. So there's a lot of questions like that. Is it a lot of questions out there like that. So, okay, what else? Okay, Priscilla Connors says, we are designing a climate-friendly meals course and are looking for insights on food and environment courses at other universities. Can you share your syllabus?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the syllabus. You can feel free to email me, or I can also just send it over to Stephen. And Stephen, please feel free to share it wide and far.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Sparsha, for being a resource and available. I really appreciate that. Okay, yeah, give me a moment. I'm going to try to get through some of these chats. A lot of great resources are being posted into the chat, so please take a look yourselves as well. A lot of links and things to explore more. So what about cost? Anyone have any thoughts on cost?
Do you mean the cost of the food itself, in terms of like a dietary cost to the consumer?
So like average cost, per meal, I guess. Like maybe, and Megan, if you wanted to add more to your question, but I think maybe I do hear a lot of questions about, okay, so plant-based foods are have a smaller impact on the environment, but would it cost more money to shift this diet, right? Maybe to
Yeah.
the consumer, to the university dining hall, and so on.
Well, it really depends on the ingredients that are being brought in. There's a great researcher called Marco Springmann. He's a fantastic researcher, not just in this area, but in all areas related to food and climate. And he looked at the budget for different types of diet. So, for example, a pescatarian diet was seen to be, according to his research, the most expensive diet, but actually a whole foods plant-based diet. And so what we mean when we say whole foods is, of course, not eating things like processed plant-based alternatives, but instead focusing on whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, which are also the most sustainable and healthiest foods. So there's like a double bonus there. That actually was seen to be the most affordable diet. So in fact, compared to the average meat eater's diet, about a third of your budget could be reduced. Your food budget could be reduced by opting for whole foods. Now, of course, if we're eating more of these kind of newer plant-based alternatives that are kind of just emerging or have only been around for half a decade or so, because of the supply and demand chain that exists, because of the way that the government allocates subsidies and public funds to the agricultural system, because of things like supermarket margins that still exist, those foods do have a higher price tag than maybe the animal products they're replicating. But that will hopefully change over time. And importantly, as it stands, often opting for those whole plant foods, which are the healthiest and most sustainable, can also reduce our budget for food as well, which is obviously a super big bonus at the same time.
Just quickly to add to our food service partners, just to be full disclosure, is sometimes moving in this plant forward direction does require more labor in the kitchen in terms of cooking. So cutting up vegetables rather than having chicken breasts or things like that. So there may be some labor costs involved. To Ed's point, it does matter what the food is, but I think it's good to be clear-eyed about that and understand, where there may be added costs, where you can help your food service partners or others that you're working with and listen to them. Why are they worried about making this transition and moving in this direction? And then help them where they can, whether it's hooking them up with people to help train on plant-based food, whether it's new products that you could connect with them with, whether it's that nudge guide that I put in the chat about, some more free things. Sometimes it's just what order you put the food in is going to drive people to eat more of something than something else, and that's free for them often. So cost kind of can be found in different places. So it's good to be aware of that and allow kind of that conversation to happen so you're not pushing people into an unsustainable kind of direction.
Okay, and there was a question about wastage, and I'd like to jump in and just mention, I just put in chat a link to an EPA report that looked at food waste. And although fruit and vegetable waste tends to be a larger portion of food waste compared to animal products, the environmental impact of the animal food waste was greater than the environmental impact of the fruit and vegetable waste. So we see a lot of fruit and vegetable waste, but the animal-based foods that we do throw away, just that little bit was more emissions intensive than the plant-based food waste. So I would say that a transition to a plant-based diet would actually reduce the emissions of our food waste as well. And I think Joseph Poore also echoed this in his report as well. Did anyone else want to jump in on that?
There are a bunch of papers that I've seen that sort of food waste is important and very much part of this discussion. But I think when you do look at the benefits of changes to diet, it impacts the food waste in such a big way. There was a paper recently that was published really well and looked at both and found that the diet changes is just so much of a bigger impact. But certainly this is very much part of the issue too.
And that's what I've been seeing as well in a lot of reports, like by the IPCC, which EPA does refer to for information and solutions to climate change. So there's that. And if we don't get to your question, please reach out and let's knock this out. This is great. So I'm going to keep reading through this chat, and Yeah, and if any of the presenters want to also browse through and jump in, feel free. But this is wonderful. Let's try to get to some of these. And yeah, thanks. We're kind of running over, but if you can stay, this is still a quite an engaging conversation. Please stay if you can. We're gonna get through some of these other questions if the presenters are okay staying. If you can't stay and you got to go, please reach out to me and follow up. You know, let me know what you thought of this webinar. Do you think it was useful, valuable? Please tell me your thoughts. And if you're going to take any kind of action as a result of this webinar, if this webinar inspired you a little bit to take any kind of action whatsoever, please let me know what those actions are, because I want to document that this service is effective in providing value. So please do that. Please give me your feedback, and also email me if you want a recording. Okay, let's jump back to the questions. Let's see. Oh, and if you're asking for a recording, remember, just because on this webinar I don't have your email address, the chat just has your name, so you're gonna have to email me directly if you want a recording, so that I can know who to send it to. Okay, wanted to mention that. This is great conversation.
Stephen, I saw somebody, I think he might have just left, Mark Rifkin at the Center for Biological Diversity, and he was asking for my email address. I hope he was able to get it. I don't know if you're still there, Mark, but I put that in chat.
Let's see, so much stuff. This is great.
I think it would be maybe great to talk a little bit. I mean, Naveen brought this up about barriers, and I wonder if that would be a useful discussion for folk who are hoping to take some action on this. You know, over my like 4 years of championing this at Harvard, in the beginning, I was just by myself, and I think the more you can link up. And so much of this was thanks to Max Bazerman. He was, I think, so central. Having that person who kind of connects everyone is so great. But I don't know if that's of interest to people.
Yeah, additional questions about cost and maybe this was already mentioned, but yeah, I remember seeing a study that a plant-based diet can be about 30% cheaper in America. So it is possible, and you know, because you think about things like beans, grains, potatoes, oats, you know, these things can be, if you have access, can be pretty cheap.
Maybe something to kind of go on off that point, Stephen, as well, is, you know, that's also bearing in mind that the system we have now isn't a financially accurate system. You know, the way that animal products are priced kind of presents a little bit of a false economy because of the massive amounts of subsidies that put into these systems. The intensification of these systems means that actually the price that we pay when we get to the supermarket checkout or till is not actually reflective of the price these products cost. You know, the environmental cleanup costs, the healthcare costs incurred from overconsumption of these products. Whilst that doesn't necessarily help a consumer right now because those costs are incurred elsewhere, I think it's also important to recognize that actually the production of chickens and cows and pigs is not a cheap business by any stretch of the imagination. And if it wasn't for the billions of dollars pumped in through subsidies and through the public funds that are allocated and then given by the US government, these industries would nowhere near be able to be as affordable as they currently are, or these products wouldn't be able to be. So as we see a transition towards a plant-based food system, not only will that be a transition in terms of the more consumption of plants, but it should as well if we allocate funds in a more sustainable way, or at least with a more of a sustainably focused mind, should actually make plant-based foods more affordable than they currently are. So even if we take the research, which is that a plant-based diet is currently about 30% cheaper if you are able to buy whole plant foods, if we were actually able to readdress how these agricultural systems are set up and currently funded and supported, actually in the future there's no reason why that figure shouldn't be even more stark, because plant foods should be cheaper than they are and animal-based food should be more expensive than they are. So it's almost a broken system that creates this illusion to a consumer that the way that the pricing is the way it should be, when actually it really isn't when we break it down.
That's a great point, Stephen. Mark Rifkin and I think he's not getting my email, and I couldn't pin him down on the internet. So I don't know if you're able to respond to his comment directly and just pass along my email address. I'm just not. I keep putting it in, but I don't think he's seeing it. So he's been asking multiple times.
He's still asking right now?
Yeah, he's still asking. I don't think he.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark Griffin. Let's see. Can we make him a presenter? Maybe that can kind of.
That might help.
You want to maybe try to look for him?
Yeah, I see him.
And Mark, if you want to email me, I can get you connected.
Yeah.
With Sparsha as well. So my email is in the chat. I'll put it in the chat again.
I'll put
so
it
so that it's fresh.
And hopefully, maybe now he'll see it. I know that there's a lot of things kind of going in the chat.
Yeah, and Sparsha, if you want to send me a note, I can remember to follow up with Mark later. There was something mentioned about fruits and vegetables being imported. The EPA report looked at that. International transportation makes up only about 3% of emissions. We do encourage you to buy in season and local when you can, but put it in perspective. We're hoping that you'll do more than just buy local, because international transportation is about 3% of foods life cycle emissions.
And we're in such an urgent place with this. The second comprehensive updating of the tipping points model as well just came out, I think a few months ago, 6 months ago or so, and it's worse than we were thinking. I was horrified looking at that report, and it was very scary. The planetary boundaries model is, that was updated in 2015. And as soon as it got published, the authors did a post saying, look, as this is being published, we've crossed the 4th planetary boundary. And so I think with that urgency, when I hear people saying, well, what about this? What about this? All of it is important, but also let's keep our eye on where that needle could be pushed the most. And that really, I think that the paper by Poor and Niemczyk, which was published in Science, I think is pretty clear. And that's the landmark study. That's our best data that we have on global farming.
Yeah, and I noticed in that study, they also looked at transportation, of course, packaging and food waste as well.
Yep.
And different types of land. Yeah,
it was amazing. It went across all of the planetary boundaries except for one, biodiversity loss, because we don't know how to measure that one. But if you measure land use, right, it's so tied to deforestation that, since we know the impact on deforestation, so 75% of deforestation is due to agriculture, and 70% of that is animal agriculture. So it's the majority of deforestation.
Yep. And then I'm just going through this chat. What a great conversation. We still have a lot of folks on the line, so this is wonderful. If Sparsha and Ed, if you're still willing, we can keep going. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see. This is the bonus material, that you get when you buy a copy.
One thing I wanted just to kind of make sure, so Ed and I worked closely together last semester, and we're hopeful to do this again in the fall as well. And just, another recommendation for people is to really, reach out to Ed, reach out to others who are in the space, who are doing this unique work that he's doing at the intersection of peer-reviewed research and conveying this information to wider audiences in academic institutions, in research. You know, a lot of scientists are just busy doing that work. And so this communication is not always happening as well as it should be to wider audiences. And we have people like Ed who, you know, they look at this peer-reviewed research, they look at it with this incredibly critical eye. I've yet to come across people in academia who look at research with such a critical eye, the way Ed does and understands. And then he's able to convey this so beautifully, so clearly to audiences that are not always academic, right? They may not always have that expertise, and he does this so well. So I encourage everyone out there, if you're in education, really look around, reach out to Ed, reach out to other people who have that skill, that the orating skill that uses the internet now, which is an emerging expertise that really we've been very slow to kind of recognize the value of in solving this problem of communication between research and wider audiences.
Okay, I got a question from, sorry if I mispronounced this, Tamaz Falkowski. You said that your school contracts with Sodexo and there might be some limits in funding. I want to let you know that I'm in contact with Rob Morosco. He's the head of Sodexo USA, as well as Jennifer. I can't remember her last name, but I'm in constant contact with Sodexo. So please reach out to me, email me, and I'll get you connected with the resources that you need. And maybe we can get your Sodexo staff on a call. And let's hash this out. You know, Sodexo can support their clients and encourages plant-based meals, and they have a lot of resources available for their clients. So let's talk more, and we'll try to figure out some other resources as well to get you going. Please email me, Tamaz or Thomas. Thank you. Okay.
There
What
was
else?
a comment from I think there was an animal producer, Jeff, and I just wanted to make sure that we were being inclusive and making sure that we're really speaking to everyone. And I just think this discussion, bringing in people with other perspectives who are still interested in this topic, is very important, because we're not going to do it without speaking with everyone about this. And I think this is something when Ed came to, when Ed as a fellow at Harvard, and when he was on campus, he was so good at this, right? Bringing people in, right? It's a discussion that we're having with each other. One of the things I think in this kind of debate about sort of, can we have our cake and eat it too, that we forget is that actually industrialized animal ag has intensified everything so much to meet that really high demand, and meeting that high demand without it would I don't know if this research has been done, but it might be like 4 planets worth of land maybe that we would need, right? So so I think that's just something for us to think about, that, you know, I hear this a lot, sort of like, well, we could change our diets, or we could switch to small farming. And small farming would not be able to meet the demand for animal-based foods that's currently existing.
I've looked into a lot of studies that look at scalability of things, and yeah, really interesting stuff.
Yeah. I think there was a report by Alexander, I think it was 2020, it was cited in the IPCC report, and it found that if everyone wanted to eat like an American, just with current methods, it would require 178% more land, right? And so I think that really, even with the systems that we have in place, where at least in this country and other developed countries, cows range and then they're sent to feedlots, right?
And another kind of a follow-up to that is actually the current trends are showing that not only is animal product consumption increasing based on current per capita demand, but it's increasing along with the population increase. We have this problem where a number of animal products that are going to have to be raised, or number of animals who are going to be raised to be killed and eaten in the future, it is increasing because the population is increasing, but it's also increasing outside of the population increasing. And as current trends are showing, by the year 2050, there's going to be 88% more ruminant animals consumed now than compared to now. So all of the issues that we're talking about is with the current system, with the current demand that we have. But by the year 2050, where we have 2 billion more people and per capita we're consuming more animal products than we currently do, we have a really dangerous situation ahead of us. And I think it was according to the World Resources Institute, to meet that demand, we'd need an area of land equivalent in size to India. And that's on top of all the land that we're currently using. And so the question then becomes, well, how many forests, can we continue to deforest? How many more wetlands and swamplands can we drain? And like, how much is there left for us to destroy to create this land that we can then meet this extra, increasing demand? And I think when we view it in kind of like terms of not just the situation we have now, but the situation which will arise if things don't change now, it becomes even more frightening. And actually, from an emissions perspective, a report from the University of Oxford back in 2019 modeled what would happen if every other industry around the world except for agriculture ceased producing emissions. So that means there's no more emissions from energy production or from transportation, just from agriculture. And agriculture alone will take us beyond the 1.5 degree threshold and would even make it difficult to not hit 2 degrees by the end of the century. And of course, those are the thresholds that were outlined during the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. So even with just the modeling that we have now for the emissions being produced right now, the question of whether we should change isn't a question if we should change. It's a question of when we're going to do it. And obviously, the longer we leave it, the worse the problems will become. And that's, I suppose, a sobering aspect of this conversation. It's a massive problem as it is now, but it's actually going to get worse because trends are showing we're going to be farming more animals unless demand changes.
And that doesn't even take into account that study, which I think is the Clark study that you might be talking about. Doesn't even take into account biodiversity loss and water use. Right. So we've, the planetary boundary for water use. It doesn't make sense to look at it at the global level. We should be looking at it regionally. And when we look regionally, there are 3 areas. And so there's northern China or northern India, China, and the central part of the US that has exceeded what is safe for water use already due to livestock.
And our EPA report also reiterates that fact that emissions from the food sector alone will surpass the 1.5 degree and even the 2 degree limit just by the food sector emissions alone projected out into the future. We put that in our EPA report. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the United Nations also reiterates that, in order to get the amount of emissions reductions needed, we need to free up land. We've got to rewild, reforest, and the best way to do that is with a dietary shift.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, Dr. Saha.
Oh, no worries. Would you mind putting that link if it's handy for you in the chat? If you have that report that you're talking about from the EPA, or I can.
Yeah, it's in there. It's in the chat already.
It's in the chat.
Yeah, it's in there. The IPCC in the United Nations, they talk about carbon removal, right? We have to go beyond just bringing fossil fuel emissions down. We have to remove carbon, and that's you do that through afforestation and freeing up that land. So that is now a critical element to addressing climate change, and I think it's because we just delayed action for so long. We have not taken action. We have not done what we were supposed to do back when we learned about this impact. We did not listen to the science. We did not take action. So now we're having to do even more now, just to stay below 1.5 degrees. So this is a very important global issue, an important time to be living as a human.
Yeah, and Stephen, based on what you're saying about carbon removal, that's obviously there's the opportunity cost of removing animals from our food system and the benefit that would provide from tackling carbon dioxide. But also one of the things that Dr. Saha mentioned earlier, which was really important, was methane and its role, not only as a more potent greenhouse gas, but in terms of methane, the way it breaks down in our atmosphere is also a really important part of this, because it has a very short half-life relative to carbon dioxide. So what that means is that when it's in our atmosphere, it breaks down within 10 to 20 years. So let's say that we eliminated animal farming from this moment, obviously an implausible one, but if we kind of think about it in those terms, that means that the methane that's been produced today won't be in our atmosphere in 10 to 20 years time. And so that actually buys us time. And the United Nations Environment Programme's Executive Director said at COP in Glasgow at the end of 2021 that cutting methane emissions is the strongest lever we have to slow climate change over the next 25 years. And that's because it buys us time due to it breaking down. The problem we have now is we keep replacing any of the methane that's breaking down with more. And because we're expanding agriculture and expanding other industries as well, it means that atmospheric methane levels are increasing, even though it breaks down at a relatively fast pace compared to other greenhouse gases. So it's not just that removing animals cuts these emissions, it actually is the best way that we have right now to slow the rate of climate change and global warming because of the way it breaks down our atmosphere. So when we look at the positives of making changes now, those positives far transcend just the more obvious aspects. And these other aspects as well. And when we think about buying time, we're buying time to then remove carbon from our atmosphere. So removing animals, reduces or removes one of the biggest emitters, one of the most potent greenhouse gases we're currently trying to contend with. At the same time as that, it slows down the rate of global warming, and at the same time as that, provides us with the best opportunity we currently have to draw down carbon dioxide from our environment because of the rewilding capabilities that it would provide us at the same time. And the food is so exciting because of the possibilities that it presents us, and also the power that's in our hands. And one of the things that's been great that Dr. Saha and I have seen during working together and also working separately is how empowering this conversation is. I think when we talk about the climate crisis, and indeed most global crises, as consumers and as citizens and as individuals, we feel so disempowered all the time because we feel helpless, or we feel like we need our legislators to do things. But food is unique because the power actually is in our hands to make changes. And through making those changes as individuals and then as collectives and societies, we can actually shape what our food system looks like. In other words, we're not relying on politicians or legislators. We're actually just relying on ourselves to make these informed choices. And I think that when we can convey not only the possibility and the potential of a plant-based food system, but also the empowering aspect of having food autonomy, I think that those two things coupled together make this an even more powerful and important conversation to have.
And to add on to this, I think this is where us all working together is so important. And an idea for everyone out there is, if you're at your school, your organization, perhaps you can do a screening around this recording, right? And help educate other people and help empower other people, because we do have that choice ourselves. But in some context, right, when that environment, the food environment, doesn't give you those better options, it's so much harder. So you can spread this information and then get everyone on board to start making those changes to the food environment, which require buy-in from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a time check. How are you guys feeling? Do you want to keep going, or is this a good place to wrap up?
I can stay on for a couple more minutes, but I probably should soon and get back to writing my lectures for tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for spending the time today with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I've been hearing about, how reducing methane emissions can create an immediate cooling effect, right? And so reducing carbon dioxide emissions, we won't feel the benefits of those effects for some time. And so if we want to stay below that 1.5 degrees the whole time, then this cooling effect can really help.
And we're doing the exact opposite. When you look at these graphs, right, it's methane has shot up just so exponentially over the last couple decades, and that's exactly the opposite needs to be happening. So it really we gotta recognize these connections. I think I do wish that media would cover this more responsibly, and zoom out a little bit more. Sometimes they get so focused on climate change and everyone is only thinking about CO2 emissions. And so when we do that, and CO2 emissions are obviously extremely important, but when we only look at them, we don't see solutions around us that are possible. So part of this is also how we're covering this to people, and I hope that we kind of see more of that complexity in coverage.
You know, I agree. I was shocked that I had to discover by myself that carbon removal is now a necessary part of a strategy to stay below 1.5 degrees. It's not only about reducing emissions anymore. We have to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And that was like, I don't know, that floored me. I thought, wow, this is bad.
Yeah.
We gotta undo what we already did, not just change our ways, you know. So
Yeah.
that's why this freeing up this land is so important.
Oh, there was a great study. I'll find it in a moment and link it. It found, it was recent, it just came out, it was published very well, and it found that in the US, a switch to the Eat Lancet diet, and so you can imagine it would be even bigger if it was a full switch, but a switch to the Eat Lancet diet would result by 2050 in the United States removing 165% of its CDR. So it's carbon dioxide removal responsibilities according to the Paris Agreement. I'll find it.
You know, this chat is amazing. I came across a chat. Someone said, you know, how can I get paid, you know, as you know, to change my farming operations? And I looked in the he was gone. I skipped the question because he was already gone, but I just saw that someone else responded and said, here's some info. And so that's really nice to see. And yeah, and I also am gonna really go through this chat with a fine-tooth comb and try to track down some of these folks and reach out and continue the conversation. So this is great. But remember, only your name is captured. If you want to guarantee I will find you, please put your email in the chat. Yep. It's great that people are talking in the chat. This is wonderful. Yeah, I'm not even halfway through the chat. So let's what do you say? You know, that was pretty good. Maybe we can call it for today so that you guys can go on to your other stuff. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So yeah, thank you again, and thank you all for staying on. We want to continue this conversation. Please reach out to me. I'm gonna put my email in the chat one more time, just so people can get it. There's a chat button. Click on the chat button. You'll be able to see the chat. My name is Steven Sturdivant. Sturdivant. It's that name dot Steven Stephen at EPA.gov gov. So let's continue this conversation and follow up. And I want to get to all of these questions. So great engagement. I thought it went well. Yeah. What did you guys think?
Yeah, very well. It's great to see. I mean, it's not often that an event can run so far past its time, have still so many people there engaging and asking good questions. So I think that's a good sign at the very least. And people's questions have been excellent, really thoughtful, really well stated. So that's been great as well.
Steven, bringing people together like this, the way you are doing, is you can't really measure how impactful that is.
And that's a good point. If you guys can help me measure this, my supervisor wants those numbers. So if you can give me just like anecdotal, like what you thought about it, or if you're gonna make a change at your establishment or your university campus, if you're gonna make a change, please share with me that success story so that I can share it along, and so that we can continue to be of value, and know how we can be of service. So please do that.
Even one thing I'm wondering, I don't know if this might be possible at your end with the recording. There were a few sound bites, particularly from Ed, in the beginning, where he kind of just gave these amazing overviews, and I think it was 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm wondering if you might, when you send out the recording, include 1 or 2 snippets from Ed, and from anyone else, that people might be able to, this is a long one, right? So it might be that they can include some of these in meetings or classes, because that information is what we need to get out.
So I'll tell you what, I can't send this out broadly with
Right.
edits. As a government agency, we need to just provide the whole thing in whole. However, you can definitely split it up and chop it up however you want and share it widely. Please do that. I can also do some editing for you, Sparsha, if you need help, or maybe you guys have editors. But I can edit whatever clips you want and send it to you directly. I can probably do that. I can make sure and check to see. But as sharing this widely, it has to be a whole continuous thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we are allowed to take a snippet and share it.
Yes. This is a public product, so
Okay.
this is free to use as you please.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe an idea for everyone to think about. You can take little bits and share widely. Play them. Find a way to play them to large audiences.
Right. Okay. And also, I'm going to leave the chat open. I might jump on other calls, but throughout the day, I'm just going to leave this chat box open. So if people want to continue to talk and chat and share, please do so. And I'm also going to be going through the chat myself this afternoon and responding to questions directly. So I will be engaging the chat as well throughout the day. So it's going to remain open. But I think for now, we can go ahead and call it an official end, and I can stop the recording. But we'll leave the chat open. So let's keep going if you guys have the time. And I wanted to say thank you again to everyone for coming. Thank you to the presenters, and I'll thank the presenters that had to go. This is I really appreciate you guys being accessible and available. So thank you all so much.
Right back at you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate you putting this on and for inviting myself to be a part of it. And thank you, Dr. Sahar, as well, for being a part of this. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Always.
Cool. All right. Well, bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.